Hello, everybody. I'm hoping you can hear me. Can I get a wave? Yes, good stuff. Awesome, great. Hi, my name is Kyle. I am one of the event coordinators here at Shelf Life Books in Calgary, and it is my pleasure to invite you to the event this evening, which is My Body is an Ocean, the virtual book tour of Kama La Mackerel's debut collection, ZOM-FAM. Woo! Yay! So the event this evening is being co-hosted by Glass Bookshop in Edmonton, and Shelf Life Books is here in Calgary. Before we get going, I would like to do a quick land acknowledgement. We here at Shelf Life Books acknowledge that we are on the lands of the Treaty 7 people, which includes the Blackfoot from Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani First Nations, the Diné Sarsi from Tsuut'ina, and the Stoney Nakoda from Morley, the Bearspaw, Chiniki, and Wesley First Nations. We are also privileged to walk in the footsteps of the Métis people from Region 3, Métis Nation of Alberta. Now, Shelf Life Books is open if you wanted to come browse our shelves. We can also do online orders, curbside pickup, and we also have a limited delivery service in Calgary as well. So if you're looking for Christmas gifts, we are open and we're happy to have you here. We're also proceeding with events like this online. So we hope that we can see your smiling faces online going into the future here. Now, tonight's event is very exciting. We have two wonderful speakers joining us. First and foremost, I would like to introduce Kama La Mackerel. Kama is a Montreal-based Mauritian-Canadian multidisciplinary artist, educator, community arts facilitator, and literary translator who works within and across performance, photography, installations, textiles, digital art, and literature. They have exhibited and performed their work internationally, and their writing in English, French, and Creole has appeared in publications both online and in print. They have lived in far-flung places such as Pune, India, and Peterborough, Ontario. ZOM-FAM is their first book. Kama's work has been published in the Lambda Literary Award-winning anthology, Glitter and Grit, Queer Performance from the Heels on Wheels Femme Galaxy in 2015, and We Mark Your Memory, Writings from Descendants of Indenture in 2018. Their translation of Kai Cheng Tom's From the Stars in the Sky to the Fish in the Sea was published in French by Editions Dents de Lorne, sorry, I probably murdered that, in spring 2019. And their co-translation of Vivek Shraya's I'm Afraid of Men was published in French by Editions du Remue Ménage in winter 2020. Also joining us this evening is Vivek Shraya. Vivek is an artist whose body of work crosses the boundaries of music, literature, visual art, theater, and film. Her best-selling book, I'm Afraid of Men, was heralded by Vanity Fair as cultural rocket fuel, and her album with Queer Songbook Orchestra, Part-Time Woman, was nominated for the Polaris Music Prize. She is also the founder of the publishing imprint VS Books, which is putting out some very exciting work. We have many copies of Vivek's work, including her most recent book, The Subtweet, which is excellent, and She of the Mountains, God Loves Hair, I'm Afraid of Men. So stop on by and you can stock up on Vivek's books as well. I should also mention, and I should have done this at the outset, if you are interested in having closed captioning for this event, you're able to enable the captions using a button at the bottom of your screen, just right next to the Q&A button. Now, with all that said, I think it is about time that I turn you over to our wonderful guests this evening, and I'll pass it over to Vivek.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I am going to give the floor over to Kama to do a wonderful reading for you, and then I will join us I will join Kama after to ask some questions, and then we will take, or Kama will take your audience questions closer to 7:45 Mountain Standard Time, and yeah, we'll go from there. So I will be back, and Kama, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I am so thrilled that we can somehow still have this event. I have actually never been to Alberta, and I was actually looking forward to it. I was actually really excited about the potential of a book tour, but unfortunately that didn't work out. So thank you everybody who's joining tonight. Thank you to Shelf Life and to Glass Bookshop for hosting this event, and Vivek Shraya for joining us. So I will read a couple of pieces from ZOM-FAM. So this is ZOM-FAM, my debut poetry collection that recently came out from Metonymy Press. So ZOM-FAM is it's a collection. It's comprised of 8 poems because they actually write really long form poems. Yeah, that basically talk about the coming of age of a gender creative child growing up on the plantation island of Mauritius in the 80s and the 90s, and the work delves into the multiple colonial legacies and the silences that exist within those, and the multiple ways in which actually voices can still emerge. Different forms of vocabularies of resistance and resilience can emerge within and through those colonial silences. So I will just go ahead and read a couple of other pieces for you. So the first piece that I'm going to read is actually the Invocation, which is the opening piece of ZOM-FAM. I invoke, I invoke, I invoke, I invoke our mothers, our grandmothers, and our femme ancestries. I invoke the teachers, healers, mentors, caregivers, and warrior women of history. I invoke femmes of all genders, bloods, ages, lineages, generations of witchers and fighters who infuse the universe with love, rage, and magic. I invoke the dynasties of femmes who gouged the earth with their bare hands and planted roots from the seeds of their hunger. I invoke the bloodlines of women and femmes whose bodies are steep with the darkness of the Kala Pani, whose spirits are awash with the cleansing light of the full moon. I invoke my great-grandmothers, whose unknowing bodies stormed on a ship from the continent to the island, hands tied, bodies battered, minds resilient. I invoke the deities who never made it to the shores, their copper flesh an offering to the creatures that live along the edge of the unknown, where ocean becomes sky and sky becomes ocean. I invoke the generations who suffered, who died, who lived, who fought, who resisted patriarchy and colonialism on sugarcane plantations. I honor my mother, Vimaladi, nurse, caregiver, teacher, mentor, inspiration, and embodiment of femme power. I honor her mother, Dana Paquion, whose fortitude knew no bounds, whose story remains untold, repressed, forgotten, chained to the silence of history. I honor Rita, whose womb carried ships of born and unborn children, brave mother who offered her milk and blood to quench the unconsolable longing of the aching land. I honor Katai, woman of rose water, saffron, betel leaves, and nuts, whose rugged feet walked earth, sand, basalt, and burning coal. I honor Kamla, whose ceremonial fingers enchant the dead and bring the spirits back to life. Uma, whose visions speak in femme tongues long forgotten. Lalita, whose sword flows like rivers longing for a sea to call home. Asha, whose ancestral lungs carry curses that quiver like crackles of burning sandalwood. Devika, whose grief is cavernous, like a sinuous passage in the night sky. And I invoke, I invoke, I invoke strength and wisdom from Goddess Kalima, Redeemer of the universe, Goddess of time, change, and destruction, Goddess with charcoal eyes and a blood tongue, who cuts patriarchy and wears it as a garland around her neck. Goddess with matted hair and ivory fangs, who dismembers misogyny and wraps it as a skirt around her waist. That lineage, past, present, and future, the women and femmes who reshape the universe, I invoke and I honor. So thank you. So that was the invocation. From ZOM-FAM. And so just to give you a little bit also of backstory about this book is that actually initially the book was not written, I mean, the pieces were not written to be a book. This was actually a manuscript that was written for the stage because ZOM-FAM is actually an interdisciplinary solo show where the poetry in movement through dance and theater, through the body across space. The performance was supposed to premiere in April of this year in Montreal, but unfortunately, as you know, the pandemic hit, and then it was rescheduled for October in Montreal again in theaters, but unfortunately Montreal entered the red zone just a week before the opening of the show, which means that we first got shut down and I couldn't present the performance. But I have hope and faith that someday, you know, the performance will be out there in the world. Yeah, but also one of the reasons why I also talk about it is because there is something about holding the object in your hand, in the sense of when I transform the manuscript from a stage manuscript into the book, one of the things that I really wanted to do with the book was to bring the performative quality into the poetry. So in that sense, I really thought about it when I turned it into a book. For me, I really thought about this work as you know, as the body of the text as being in performance on the page. So everything, actually, all the text in the book is actually laid out in very intentional ways, that brings about that performative quality to the text. So as much as I love reading the book as well, I also encourage you to hold it in your hands and see what that does for you as a feeling that carries you through stories. The next part that I'm going to share with you is actually the piece in the book that is titled ZOM-FAM, which happens towards the end of the book. Yeah, so I'm just going to delve into it. So this is the piece ZOM-FAM from ZOM-FAM. When I tell my mother that I am trans, her lips wobble a minor tremor, but her silence does not span the 3 decades of my life. She smiles with compassion. She speaks her golden heart, soft, warm, welcoming. Her eyes cast a resilient glow. She does not need to tell me about our history. Our lineage is one of silence that we weave in between our intimacies. But her body, her brown, exhausted body speaks of her childhood. I see in her old eyes the grimy streets of Portrush, grey, dusty, stifling under the burning sun. I see in the drooping ridges around her cheeks the cold embrace of banyan trees when the summer heat became too heavy to bear. I see in the shakiness of her eyelids melted tar gluing itself to her 8-year-old feet. In the streets of the capital, poverty was a sticky business. Particles of blackness stained the virtuous skin of childhood. I see in my mother's shiny forehead, in the beads of sweat that placed themselves evenly on her skin, a child pushing a cart. Unde putu adu sonso. Unde putu adu sonso. Those sweets that her godmother made diligently with freshly crushed coconut and ground rice, and that she'd push in a cart every single day of her life from Plaine Verte all the way to Cité Sainte-Croix. Unde putu adu sonso. Unde putu adu sonso. When I look deep into the battered trenches under my mother's eyes, I see copper coins shifting hands, churchgoers, beggars, children, sex workers, faithful and unfaithful, unwrapping round coconut crown rice sweets from the humidity of newspapers, dipped into hot black tea, an everyday ritual of my mother's childhood in Cité Sainte-Croix. When I tell my mother that I am trans, her withered hands shake like dried twigs forgotten by history, but her silence does not span the 3 decades of my life. She tells me, "Pas tracasser-toi, Kama. Te connais, dis-moi comme à toi, tout le temps tu es dans ça." She tells me that we come from a history and a culture where the man women and the women men have always existed. That people like me are present in our myths and our religions, and that for as long as she can remember, Viejimun, the elders, they spoke of the men women and the women men. Her eyes mirror phantom images, lucent narratives line her haunted lips. She whispers into the soles of my feet that she vaguely remembers an old relative who lived close by when she was a child, who was of my kind. But she immediately closes her heart, fetters her lungs, stitches her throat with a filament of concealment. She threads the unspoken between our bodies because our lineage is one of silence that we weave in between our intimacies. But every day since I dream of my mother's childhood. I dreamed of this old relative who was of my kind. Sometimes I call him Pajani. Sometimes I call him Devakumar. Sometimes I call her Badet. And sometimes I call her Nila. But most of the times I call her Kumkum. I dream of Kumkum with round shoulders, a blood-red bindi on her forehead, a glint of gold hanging over the edge of her pointed nose, raven curly hair, a tad too greasy, but that still bounces up and down the nape of her neck as she walks in the morning sun. Kumkum wears plain cotton kurtas that she haggles in the markets of Plainvert. And if she ever gets invited to a wedding, she adorns herself of her most prized garment, a brocaded red salwar kameez that wraps her body like the heavy skin of syrupy lychee. Kumkum eats rice dal and pickles during the week. And on weekends, she treats herself to some dried salted fish cooked with onions, fresh thymes, and tomatoes. And bon tirougaille poisson salé bien mauricien. And bon tirougaille poisson salé bien mauricien. Kumkum has a radio set. And she listens to the news and Avis de Décès every morning. And Hindi songs every evening. Kumkum rubs coconut oil in her thick black hair every Friday. Kumkum has a job. She works in the tobacco factory in the capital city with all the poor women whose husbands had died in obscure wars nobody on the island really knows about. They fought in a faraway British war and never came back. On her lunch break, Kumkum does not step out with the other women to roll tobacco in small newspaper pieces that burn their darkened lips. Instead, she stays at her workstation. She sits silently and she prays. She prays to Goddess Durgama. She prays for protection. She prays for a good life. She prays for forgiveness. She prays for love. When it gets hot in the capital city, Kumkum takes out a white handkerchief from her purse and wipes the purse of sweat from her forehead. Kumkum likes flower patterns. Kumkum loves embroidery. On Sundays, Kumkum polishes her floor et qu'un brosse coco. She brings out her mattress, leans it in the sun against the mango tree, and beats it with a stick. She winnows her rice and her lentils for the week. She makes fruit pickles that she dries on her roof, and at the end of the day, she massages her feet with a slick of warm coconut oil. Kumkum has a lover. But does Kumkum have a lover? I'm not sure yet whether Kumkum has a lover, but this is Kumkum. This is Kumkum, and I dream about her every day. She draws her life like a moving sculpture, a figure ever so ephemeral, becoming and unbecoming herself with every single one of my dreams. When I tell my mother that I am trans, she does not tell me about Pajani, Devakumar, Badet, or Nila. She does not even tell me about Kumkum. Instead,
My mother tells me that she is an uneducated woman who feels much pride that I went to school, that I can read and write, that I speak English and I speak French. She tells me that because of her lack of education, she does not have the words for it, but she understands that people like me have always existed. She calls me ZOM-FAM, which in our local language means man, woman. I take pleasure in being ZOM-FAM, a man, woman, being neither ZOM nor FAM, yet being both ZOM and FAM, navigating a middle passage between being and being, an interstice where migrant bodies like mine find their truth, an undefinable space that maps the cartography of my skin, a hyphen that holds and wraps my gendered experience. ZOM-FAM, 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 ZOM-FAM. But my mother tells me that I shouldn't call myself ZOM-FAM, that she is an uneducated woman who does not know those things. But she is happy, she's happy, she's happy that I have an education, that I can call myself trans, that I have the words, the language to describe the mystification of my gender, the longing to tear off my skin, along with my skin, my birth certificate, my passport, the state-sanctioned papers that dictate my gender. But deep inside me, there is a voice that speaks in the uneducated tones of my mother. This voice embroiders itself from pore to pore onto the surface of my skin. There is a voice that does not have the words or the vocabulary, but reverberates goodness and music in my body, my heart, beating the drums of my ancestors. There is a voice that did not go to school, does not speak English, does not speak French, and yet echoes wisdom and truth in my bloodstream, like the waves of the ocean that witnessed the loss of our languages. And that voice tells me that I do not need an imperial language to define myself, that I do not need to be trans in English, in French, that colonialism has already wrapped itself like a knot around our vocal cords. And even though our lineage is one of silence that we weave in between our intimacies, this voice exists deep within, and it speaks like my mother, like my grandmother, like my great-grandmother, like the generations of women and femmes who fought to keep our language alive and pass it on from generation to generation. So, mother, I will listen. I will listen to the voices of our ancestry, femme tongues that dictate that I speak out loud. And when I'm done tearing off my skin, along with my skin, my birth certificate, my passport, the state-sanctioned papers that dictate my gender, I will take every single piece of torn skin and paper. I will paint them in gold and put them back together with glistening stars as I so desire. I will build a femme armor, a fierce femme armor that I will celebrate, an unbreakable, unshakable object of love that I will hold together with respect and dignity. And I will call this armor ZOM-FAM, ZOM-FAM. 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 When I tell my mother that I am trans, her lips wobble a minor tremor, but her silence does not span the 3 decades of my life. She does not need to tell me about our history. She does not need to tell me about our history because our lineage is one of a secret language. Our lineage is one of a long lost secret language that we weave in between our intimacies. ZOM-FAM.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here, for joining tonight. I guess, yes, this was ZOM-FAM from ZOM-FAM, and this is, I guess, the moment when Vivek joins me again.
Yay! That was so beautiful. Thank you so much. I mean, I feel like on behalf of the coronavirus, I just want to apologize to you. Like, I feel like you should be performing this in a theater. I feel like devastated. I mean, I think you've done such an incredible job tonight, but I just like, I really was watching this in a theater space tonight. And I really feel for like first time authors this year. I feel like you're sort of like robbed on two ends. It's like your theater show and then also just having the experience of a book launch and book tour. So thank you so much for being so generous with your energy and your reading tonight, because I want so much more for you.
Thank you.
So I'm just going to jump right in here.
Sure.
So like you talked about, the book started out actually as like a manuscript for a play. And I'm curious, like in terms of breaking down, so you're a multidisciplinary artist, you've worked in photography and textile. Why poetry? So if you're going to create a manuscript of a play, like why not prose or even essay? Like what was it about breaking it down in a poetic form that appealed to you?
Yeah, thank you. Also, can I just say, I feel so, oh my God, I love you so much. And you look stunning
Lots of
tonight,
love,
as you always do. So I'm like, ah!
Yeah, I love that we're matching in our like
I know.
print, our animal print. We'd even planned that. We're in sync.
That was just a fun magic. But yeah, I mean, I think, poetry for me remains my first love in many ways. And I think, poetry has always been like, I've always had a love of poetry from a very young age, as in like since a teenager, so to speak, and I've dabbled into all different forms of poetry. I think the turning point for me was after I had moved to Montreal, so around like I would say 2012, 2013 or so, when I really started writing poetry, quote unquote, seriously. And what I mean by that is basically I discovered the open mic and spoken word scene actually of Montreal, which was really also the space where I found where the queer and trans people of color were in particular. And that's when I started writing poetry in that way. Like, like I wrote sonnets and like things like that. That's what I mean by like I dabbled into poetry. But the thing is, like, before this even became a manuscript for the stage, those pieces were written as separate spoken word pieces. And for me, they were written, and I didn't know it would become a project someday. Like I had written them separately. Actually, the very first piece, Muffin, which is the story of the birth of the child, the first version of this was written in 2013. And that was the first spoken word piece that I and the first spoken word piece that I had performed, because I had never done spoken word before. And I fell in love with the spoken word for, like, in that sense, like, like I started writing poetry to perform, to go to spoken word nights, to perform on stages. And it's only at a later point, I already had a few of those pieces written. It was around like 2016, 2017, that and the way it felt for me, it always felt like the body of work was speaking back to me. It felt like the poetry was telling me, hey,
look here, there's a story there, there's a storyline, maybe you should develop the story. So when those were written, they were written separately. I didn't even know there was a storyline there, and it's only at a later point that I was like, oh, I think you're telling me that you want to become something else. So then I reworked the pieces, created new ones, removed some, and then started working on it for the stage. But and also just to answer also that question in terms of being an interdisciplinary artist, like an artist working in multiple disciplines, whether I'm independent of the media in which I'm working, and a lot of times they mix media, right? The first part of the process is writing. Like even if it's a photography project, the first part is there's always a part of poetry, and then I'm like, okay, you are not going to exist as poetry, you're going to exist in something else. But like the beginning, the inspiration for me a lot of times like starts with the poetry, and then it develops into something else.
Wonderful. Well, I mean, the other thing is that there's a musicality to the book. You know, I actually watched a video where you sang a little bit from the book elsewhere, and then tonight you also graced us with your singing. And I'm curious about your relationship between poetry and music, and poetry and song. And, you know, when you were working on this book, did you know that certain sections were meant to be sung, or has this been something that you had, like, that has sort of come about organically? I'm just, yeah, curious about that relationship between poetry and song.
Yeah, I mean, I think not at all, actually. Like the song thing is quite new even for me. Uh, I think there are two parts to it. I think there's one part which is the musicality, because you know, as a spoken word artist, I knew over the years like just how like, oh, there's a journey that just the voice can carries the story and carries the audience. And that's something that I was aware of. And in terms of the musicality of it, I wanted to more than anything remain true to my accent, like also like my quirky English, in the sense of like, you know, English is my third language. From growing up in Mauritius and then spending 5 years in India, where I spoke Indian English, and then moving to Peterborough, Ontario, out of all places, which was, you know, like, and discovering Canadian English. And now I live in Quebec, where I live a lot in French, right? And then I'm just like, yeah, try to place my accent. And I think for me, yeah, because when I moved here in Canada in particular, I think I had a lot of shame around my accent and how I spoke English and stuff like that. And I think with time, I realized, no, there's a musicality. When I started doing spoken word, I was like, I think there's a musicality that's mine, and I want to honor that. So that was one part of it. But the part of the song itself, so I don't sing. I mean, I didn't used to sing at all. As in, like, I was somebody whom you wouldn't even hear singing in the shower up until 2 years ago. I had never gone karaoke, you know, like it's like I don't karaoke. I mean, I go and I watch and I dance, but I'm like, you know, I was always like, listen, like I dance and I do theater and I work with textiles and I work with photography and I write. I don't need to sing. But for the longest time, I had a huge fear of my voice, and the singing parts and the chanting really came in the development of ZOM-FAM as a performance, in the development of the show. Because a lot of the theme for me, I went in 2019, January 2019, when I started developing the show, I told myself that in the process of developing this work, I will have to step into my fears. And one of my big fears was actually singing. So I was like, okay, I need to step into this fear. So I took some vocal training just to like familiarize myself with the organ, and yeah, and then I started playing with like, oh, what if I sang, you know, like I started seeing also how it came in my body. So that part of the chanting and the singing came at a later point, not just in the process, but also way later point in my life as well.
Well, I love that. I mean, I think as artists, we have such a responsibility to challenge ourselves if it's something that we want. And so, yeah, I think that's so beautiful that you chose the thing that you feared and you went for it. I feel like I can relate to that so much. So, you know, I noticed in the book, you italicized some non-English words and not others. And, you know, I'm always, especially, I mean, you're actually a professional translator, but I'm always so curious about how, you know, writers of color who navigate English and non-English languages do that on the page. And so I'm curious about your choices around, you know, when you used italics, when that felt important, and other times where you chose not to use italics.
Thank you. That's also a great question. Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, I think there was a part, like, for me in terms of the book, like the title is ZOM-FAM. It's in Creole, and that was very intentional. That was a political choice. That was so important for me because so much of the work is about even disentering a Western colonial notion of
Exactly.
gender and trans
Exactly.
identities. And I was like, I don't care if the book is written in English and is being published in Canada, and you're going to see this in the bookstore, and you're going to have no clue what it means. Like that part for me was very clear. And I don't translate. There's a lot of Creole interweaved into it, and the Creole is not translated. Like that part was very intentional for me in terms of that. And then there are other plays that I do with the English, because I did ask myself the question of, how am I going to articulate decolonial poetics while using an imperial language? So there's a lot of things that I did just with the English in terms of that. I mean, I think most of it, I have italicized the Creole, but didn't translate any of it and left it as that. And the little bits of French as well, I think, and Tamil and Hindi and whatever ancestral languages from Mauritius. I think there were just like a couple of moments where I think, where I didn't italicize them, because in terms of like one of the parts that I can think about right now is the line, like, and then the father rushed up to the Mariam and Colville, and I was like, within a Mauritian context, like it's just a statement. I was like, I'm just gonna leave it as that and not put it into italics in that sense. And then the part that are more, there was just like for me a natural flow to the the building of Mauritius in that sense. And then the parts where I italicized them, they were more intentional because they were their own bits of poetry in that sense, in Creole.
Beautiful.
Like their own.
Yeah. Beautiful. I love the fact that you chose a title that wasn't English. I think it's so important for us to be thinking about how to like decolonize CanLit, so to speak. So I love and adore Amber Dawn. She's one of my favorite people on the planet, and I believe that she edited your book. Yeah, and so I'm curious how you navigated working with a white editor for a book that's so rooted in your experience as a racialized person.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question. I mean, that's I think for me, it's about relationship building. I mean, also both my co-publishers at Metonymy Press are also white, right? And there's also that decision of like, whom am I going to trust this work with? In that sense, and for me it is about the relationship, like, and the care that goes in the relationship. I mean, it was like the way I ended up working with Amber Dawn, because my publishers like asked me like, do you have an editor you want to work with? And my dream was to work with Amber Dawn, so I was like, should I just go with my dream and then we'll
Best
see?
Dream, best dream.
Because I have a lot of reverence for Amber Dawn. Like I've like her work was so influential for me. Like and also we had met a few years ago during a spoken word event that we had done in Vancouver. So there was already like a bit of a relationship there as well. And and a lot of it actually, yes, there was already a prior relationship there from when we worked on that performance together, which was also with Kai Cheng Tom and Leah Lakshmi Pips Nasara Masina. The four of us had done a poetry performance together a few years ago, and that was before I was even published or anything like that, right? Like, and there was something about the care in the relationship, like like it's just the care and the honesty and the vulnerability. Like there was already like something about trust there. And surprisingly, in the process, actually in the editing process, both with Amber Dawn and then also with my publishers at Metonymy Press, they actually pointed out to me moments where I was almost like erasing my own voice, and I didn't realize I was doing this. There were like moments where like I remember like they really pushed me to even go further in ways that I realized, oh, there were certain things that I was maybe being apologetic about, or that where I didn't want to go there too far, I didn't want to push too much there. And then there were a couple of moments I remember even in terms of like when I gave the manuscript to my publishers, I was like, Canadianize it, as in the sense of like, I have weird spelling because in Mauritius you learn British English, and then I was in India, which is Indian English, but also like British influence, and then North American Canadian English is different. And I'm still like lost between all of it, and I write between all of it. And I remember the moment, my publishers were like, yeah, but if that's the way, if that's your English, you should just keep it, So there were a lot of moments like these, I have to say. And yeah, and working with Ambadon was just what a blessing could I have been. Could the femme deities have blessed me more than that?
No, I mean, dream come true completely. I'm going to ask you one more question, and then, for those of you that are watching, feel free to type questions for Kama in the question box, and I will be happy to ask Kama those questions. And of course, if you don't have questions, I have a million more for Kama, so not to worry, no pressure. So one of the things personally, so I mean, first of all, I don't know if I actually have said this so far. I mean, this is definitely one of my favorite poetry books. I love it so much. I was so honored when you asked me to read it, to blurb it. And yeah, I connected to it for so many reasons, being a fellow like Brown and STEM. So thank you for writing this book, and highly, highly recommend this book to all of you tonight that are watching. But one of the things that I connected to specifically was all the Hindu references throughout the book, via your parents. And I'm curious about your own relationship to Hinduism and how it impacts your art at all, if at all, or if it's mostly, sort of through your parents.
Yeah, I mean, so the thing about it is like I grew up in an inter-ethnic mixed race, Black and brown family, which was also inter-religious in the sense of like my dad's Catholic, my mum is Hindu. I went to an all-boys Catholic school. There's a story about it in the book. And I think, like we grew up between Catholicism and Hinduism. And I think there was a while in my life that like, yeah, I took Catholicism very seriously, particularly during my early teenage years when I was in an all-boys Catholic school, and I took it very seriously. And then I totally broke away from it because I was like, I can't keep living a life that's like, centered in guilt and shame all the time. And I moved away from it. And I think when it comes to the writing of the book and of the poetry and the presence of Hinduism, I think there are a few things for me. I think part of it is like the fact that my mum is Hindu, and I was really exploring my femininity. And I think that's a lot of it came through that of like, unlike, let's say, my dad's Catholic side, in that sense. Like, so I think there was, like, 'cause I felt like wrapped in Mauritian femininity, at least my mother and her sisters, is also their spirituality and their religious practices. Which was one part of it, but the other part of it for me was I've increasingly over the past few years, and ZOM-FAM is part of that project, that ongoing project of, for me, I am working through an understanding and an experience and a way of being trans feminine, specifically that's grounded in spirituality, that is actually a spiritual practice. As opposed to like the dominant Western colonial discourse around gender dysphoria, where it's centered in the body and it's about the body, and that needs to be medicalized. So, and for me, increasingly, I mean, in finding myself within that, like, yeah, my spiritual practice is quite wide. I mean, I've been doing Vipassana for more than a decade. That's been my primary meditation practice that I've been doing.
I don't know how you do that. The idea of being quiet for like 10 minutes is like, I can't even do it. My boyfriend is always like, can you be quiet? And I'm just like, no, I don't know. That's incredible.
But yeah. So yeah, no, I sit on it. I sit on a daily basis. Like
Wow.
I sit, on a daily basis. Of course, I fall off sometimes, but I always go back and I have a daily practice of sitting. But I think, I think for me, then creating that femininity, also the goddesses, like the goddesses in Hinduism felt like really, like it really resonated with me, you know, and like remembering the Mariamman temple, which is actually a South Indian temple, you know, where my father went in, as it's said in the story, to find my name, right? Like to bless the child. And so I've been going back to this then. I'm like, oh, what is that goddess? What is the part of that divinity that lives in me? So that's been really how I've been exploring it. And a lot of it really is just, yeah, because my mom is Hindu.
Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, well, we have an audience question here. So
Yeah.
first of all, love your outfits. Question for Kama: how do you take care of yourself when writing about vulnerable topics in the both the writing process and editing process?
Uh, in terms of the writing process, I take my time. Like, I mean, I'm somebody where I'm just like, this has been 5 years in the making. So I'm very process oriented in that sense. When it comes to the process, I never force my process. I let my process, like, I really have a deep trust in the process, where I'm like, you guide me and you tell me and I will trust you. And that part is very important for me, because then I never go into places where I feel like I'm crossing a boundary or like I'm pushing against something. I try not to bring myself into those spaces. I think the other part of it, for me, is about a life practice. It's not just about the creative process, but it's about everything else that I have around me as a life practice. And, you know, and part of it is, yeah, I sit and meditate on a daily basis, you know, like, and that allows me to ground myself. That allows me to be in touch with my intuition. That allows me to listen, right? Like, if a fear is emerging, I can name it, where I'm like, oh, I'm actually really scared right now. And then I can sit with it and unpack it and figure out, okay, is this a good fear that I need to step into, or is this my body telling me danger, danger, get out, you know? Like, so I think like developing rituals, like developing a life practice for me is something that you know, like, yeah, that like actually really nurtures me. I have a lot of plants, as you can see, they're all over the place, but like you know, gardening and actually getting my hands dirty and having plants and like grounding myself, like literally, it's like you're working with earth. It doesn't get more grounded than that. But like for me, there's something about like also yeah, it's like grounding myself in like the rituals of nature, almost like, you know, like allowing inspiration from the cycles of nature, and there's magic there. And the last part of this is also, and then which ties both to the question of editing and writing, um, having good people, like having, you know, sustainable, trustworthy, deep, profound, loving relationships, having people to whom, and of course that's also a scary process of like being vulnerable, and it takes time and years to build relationships. And I'm very blessed to have some of those relationships in my life, of people who've, you know, who've seen all my births and rebirths of the past 15 years or so. And, you know, some people ever since I moved to Canada in 2008, right? Like, and I think having that also, those relationships allow my, like, you know, allow me to ground myself, allow me to take care of myself, or they take care of me. And I think it's the same then with the editing process. It's about having trusting relationships. It's about, you know, like, I mean, I you know, to go back to the question you asked me, right? Like, I work with Amber Dawn and with Metonymy Press because I knew, I mean, I already had a prior relationship with Amber Dome. I felt very nurturing and safe, but also I've seen Metonymy Press. I've known them as an independent press who's been working with trans women of color in this city, and like, you know, and I've seen them work with many writers, and I knew, you know, like for me, I was like, oh, this will be a relationship first. So I think that part is important.
Thank you so much. So I think that we're slowly wrapping down here. I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we'll bring back Kyle and in Shelf Life to wrap things up for us. So, you know, as mentioned, you're a multidisciplinary artist. You know, I'd love to know more about your future projects. You know, I know that one of your deep relationships is with Kai Chang. I'm so curious if either of you have talked, or if both of you have talked about a collaboration of some kind, or maybe you've already collaborated. And or, you know, I know that your play has been shut down twice due to COVID, and I am curious, any chance of a third attempt? So yeah, can you please tell us a little bit more about like what we can hope from you next?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of things going on. I mean, in terms of the show, I don't know what's gonna happen now. Actually, funnily enough, the theater that was programming it tried to reprogram it for the first week of December, and I was like, I'm not sure about this. And then they had to cancel it again last week because the government was like, we're extending the measures. But
No.
I mean, yeah, I mean, with to be honest with you, with the performance, I have so much faith in it. Like the show is mounted, is ready, and again the process of working on it was just like so transformative. Like it was just like when I finished the technical residency, I was like, oh, like I felt like I had traveled across like universes, like and I grew so much from it. And I trust, for me, like again, I would just trust the process, because I'm like, because I do believe when you put that kind of intention and energy into the universe, it's gonna come back. So I'm like, I just trust the universe. Do your thing. When the skies are ready to open again, I think the show is gonna happen. In terms of, I mean, you talk about my relationship with Kai Cheng, which is funny. The invocation that I did, that I performed earlier today. Kai Cheng and I, over the years, have performed this piece together so many times,
Oh,
where she would chant her poetry and then I would do the invocation at the same time, and we would just invoke together.
we need
We've
to
done that
see that.
so many times over the years. But I just finished. I mean, also, as you mentioned, I have a francophone literary practice as well, and I just finished the translations of Fierce Femmes and Notorious Liars by Kai Cheng Tom. That's coming out in September here in French. I think I'm kind of, as I was translating the book and like delving into the book with so much intimacy, I've started having visions of like, what if we turn Fierce Femmes into a play?
Ooh,
Like I'm like,
yes, I
there are
can
certain
see
scenes where
that.
I'm
I
like,
can see
yeah,
that. Yeah.
like a trans woman only cast, like that has like like, so. But that's just like again, it's an intention. I'm putting it out into the universe. But more concretely, in terms of projects, I'm developing a new photography and visual arts project called Queering the Island Body, which is, for me, it's like it's all part of the same body of work. But I'm actually going back to Mauritius in January to work on this, and it's really, I mean, it's a project that's really wants to put the queer femme body in relationship with the land, like in relationship with the island. And I'm really exploring the space, the space between the body and the land. And for me, this is actually the spiritual space. So that's one of the next projects that's happening. I have a couple of solo exhibits lined up. In next year, I'm exhibiting at Artsite in Windsor in March, and then I have another exhibit, but I'm not allowed to announce it quite yet. So projects. Yeah, we'll see. And then I'm hoping I'm also this winter. My project is I'm also translating ZOM-FAM, so I'm writing a French version of it.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, my plan is to write a French version of it and then a Creole version of it as well. So that's kind of what's going to happen next, hopefully.
Beautiful. Wow. Oh my God. So much to look forward to. Well, I'd love to reinvite Al back into the conversation, but just on a personal note, I want to thank you again so much for your generosity tonight. Again, as someone who's done a lot of these like Zoom events, I know how challenging it is to like perform to a camera. And I think you just handle it with so much beauty and grace. And, I think this book is such a gift to all of us, especially this year. I think, we need to have these kinds of stories and intimacies. So thank you so much for just, writing this book. And, I hope in a better time, in a better place, we can be together in person. And thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Vivek, for joining me. Like, really, I'm so touched, so honored, and thank you, Glass Bookshop and Shelf Life Books, for hosting this Alberta book launch, even if I couldn't physically make it. And thank you, everyone who came tonight.
Awesome. That was such a beautiful event. Thank you so much on behalf of Shelf Life and Glass Bookshop. Thank you so much for sharing your work with us this evening. Really appreciate it. Just a reminder that you can pick up ZOM-FAM here at Shelf Life. There is a link in the chat if you wanted to purchase it online. And if you're in Edmonton, there is a link to Glass Bookshop as well. And you're also able to find a link to this book on our Facebook event page and the event page on our website. So please do pick up this very exciting, beautiful, beautiful book. With that said, I just want to extend a thank you to our wonderful guests this evening, Kama and Vivek. Thank you again, and we hope everybody has a wonderful and safe evening, and we will see you in the near future. Have a nice evening.